Hi everyone, my name is Jill and I've been attending Park here for a little over 3 years. I'm a partner here with my husband and we love it here. And even so much, I joined staff a couple weeks ago and I'm just excited for this opportunity to be able to talk with our lead pastor, Jackson Crum, hear a little bit more about the vision, the heart behind Unfinished. Hopefully this gives you some background that's really helpful as you consider and pray about what God might have you to do with the Unfinished initiative. So we're going to talk a little bit about how things got started, how this year has been, and also get to some of the practical questions like what happens after 2017 and what happens if I move away from the city, and also where are we going next with new campuses. Jackson, I think just to start it off, what is Unfinished?
Unfinished is an opportunity for us to grow as disciples of Christ in a key area of our life, the area of generosity. Specifically, it has to do with our vision, what God has called us to do in the next couple of years here at Park. And the whole idea of unfinished is that vision God's given us is unfinished. So our generosity is our support of what God's called us to do as a church.
What does this mean for the kingdom? How do we have a kingdom focus as we go about this?
Yeah, absolutely. We have said from day one, it is not about making our name great. It's about the 2.7 million people that live in our city, as well as our engagement overseas, most of whom do not know Jesus. And it's about us making sure that they all have an opportunity to be exposed to this amazing, great news that there is a God who created them, knows them, loves them, and has sent a Redeemer to them.
What were some of the specific financial goals for Unfinished, and also just the goals for what God would have us do in the city?
Jill, first and foremost, we wanted to see people grow in their generosity. Truly, because I am convinced, because it's happened in my own life, if you learn how to live generously, it changes the way you look at everything. So that's first and foremost. Second was $22 million. $22 million because that fit the vision that God has given us. And that is to see 20 campuses or church plants by the year 2020.
I know that this last year our contributions met our expenses. However, we were short in what we had anticipated to get. We didn't meet our goal. Does that, from a leadership perspective, from your vision, the leadership team, does that change how we look at this next year of Unfinished?
No, not at all. Because what we're believing is what God did in their heart at the beginning when they made their commitments, because we built our budget off our commitments as a community, that they will be faithful to finish and fulfill those commitments. So I would say no, not at all. We're going to keep going. Though we want to be mindful, we want to be wise, and we want to keep an eye on things. What we want to do is we want people to remind themselves that we all make choices all the time financially. I take out a mortgage, I buy a new phone, all these things. And what we're saying in generosity is that our lives get reordered.
Right.
And we begin to say, all right, the kingdom should be my first choice where I invest. And so hopefully that we'll do a better and better job, and our people will be even better and more responsive to the movement of the Spirit, that we'll be able to pick up where God has called us to fulfill the pledges in which we made a year ago.
What would you say for those watching right now that aren't committed? Maybe they're new to visiting Park, maybe they're new to just exploring the faith and Christianity, like just the thought of why does the church talk about money so much?
Yeah. It's funny, Jill. I can talk to a gentleman about pornography, for instance, and that's a pretty serious subject. Or I can talk to a gentleman about his marriage. Or I can talk to him about any number of things. And all of them important and crucial. But we all kind of get the heebie-jeebies when we talk about money.
Oh, yeah.
But really, money is probably the most important area that says that I've become a true disciple of Christ. It's the area where we're the most tight-fisted, where we have the most struggle. Someone once said, if you notice, you walk into the kingdom, your wallet's the last thing to join you. And that's probably true. But the true indication that I'm becoming a disciple of Christ is that my money, the way I'm thinking about my money and my possessions changes. Jesus talked about money more than he talked about any other subject. And the fact that it makes us uncomfortable, we should all be asking, why? Why does it make us uncomfortable? Because that's an idol for most of us. It's the area we want to cling to and hold on to.
Absolutely.
But it's also the area that indicates that I'm becoming a true disciple when I'm willing to live with open hands. I don't think we talk about money a lot. I think we talk about it in an appropriate way. And I think that we talk about it enough to remind people of where we are and where we're going. What people forget sometimes is the church has bills. God gives us a vision, but he also, I believe, when he gives you a vision, he also says, within your faith community are the means that I've given you to reach that vision. So it's an issue of, always comes back to about me as the individual.
So when Unfinished was launched at the very beginning, some of what brought us all together is to realize that this is possibly the most spiritually significant 2 years that we've seen as a church, or even individually in our own lives and families and small groups and campuses. What has it meant for you this past year? How has God moved in your life? How has your faith been challenged or strengthened through Unfinished? What is this, the spiritual significance of this season for you?
Well, a couple of things. One, Easter, seeing 4 campuses launched, and especially where we launched them. I mean, that was incredibly encouraging to me. I am so proud of some of our campus pastors in the neighborhoods they're choosing to wade into. And I'm telling you, we're learning. We are learning. And I'm learning a lot from our campus pastors and the people at those campuses on how to do ministry in underserved areas. And then Don and I, in our house, we made a big decision. We made a sacrificial decision because, yeah, I work here, but it's also my church. And I am committed to the vision of this church.
4 new neighborhoods at Easter this past year. What does the preparation look like for that? How do you even begin to launch and get the vision for that?
First, I'll tell you, Jill, it sounded like a great idea at the time. Let's do 4 all on Easter. It sounded great. It was crazy. But we had amazing staff and lay volunteers who engaged in this and made this thing happen. We do go into a neighborhood, and we do go in as learners because we assume we don't know. We don't go in assuming that we do know. So we sit down with those who are already there. We sit down with the churches that are already there, talk to them about the things they're learning, things that they are understanding. We sit down with the shareholders of the neighborhoods. It might be an alderman, it might be other key leaders. And we ask them, what are the needs of this neighborhood? And how can we come in to serve and understand what the issues are?
Are they fruitful? What's kind of the status of those locations right now?
I tell you what's fun is we moved into 2 underserved neighborhoods and 3 underserved schools. We're renting 3 schools, and all 3 of them are underserved schools. And the reason I bring that up, it gives us a chance to invest back in the school, because the rent for the school stays at the school.
That's awesome.
And then as a church, as a campus there, we engaged in with the teachers and the students in that school. And so that's a big plus for us, as well as moving in these 2 underserved neighborhoods, North Rogers Park and Bridgeport. These are tough neighborhoods, and we've had to learn. Thankfully, Kenson Lamb grew up in one of them. He's a Bridgeport pastor and understands it really well. But North Rogers Park has been a learn. We've been engaged up there for a couple of years. But opening the campus there, or really adopting a church and partnering together in a greater work, it's been a big, big learn for us.
So when we launch a new campus, you mentioned we pray about it, we go in there, we're learners, but how do we determine where we're going next? Are we still committed to, I remember hearing the south and the west of the city, is that still the map that we're looking at, or?
Yeah, the reason I even laugh is because in the past, we have picked certain neighborhoods to go to, and God has gone, no, we want you to go over here instead. Yeah, we still want to go west and south. There is no doubt about it. And we are trying to staff ourselves to go west and south, and we are trying to learn the issues of west and south. But what has happened to us for a couple of our campuses, we've had churches approach us and say, would you consider adopting us? Would you consider coming in and letting us be a part of what you're doing? We love what you guys are doing, and we'd like to be a part of this thing that you want to see happen in the city. I had a gentleman come up to me several years ago after a Vision Sunday where we were talking about just being engaged in the city, and he walked up to me and said, would you consider adopting a church? My father's an associate pastor up at Forest Glen, and they would love to have this conversation with you. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. And so since then, we have had 4 church adoptions.
So I think that leads to the next question on a lot of people's mind. Are we launching 4 more this year? What's the momentum?
This coming year, we're looking at the possibility of 1, possibly West Rogers Park, which is in Little Pakistan. And we're looking at what that might mean, because we're getting people begin to say to us, could we do something there? And so when you have people from Park in the neighborhood asking, could we do something, you want to definitely take a look at that. But part of it is this coming year is we're saying, all right, how do we make sure that we as a church become more and more outwardly focused. We started these new campuses. We want to make sure they are up and healthy. We want to make sure our existing campuses are spiritually healthy. And then we as a church want to make sure that we're looking outward. Because it's very easy to, when you plant 4 churches, go, all right, let's make sure everything's good, everything's working, and lose sight of what it means to be on mission. And that's being engaged with people, our neighbors, our co-workers, our family. And so we're really spending this year to make sure that we're looking outward as well.
So 4 campuses last year, 9 campuses total now. Last year you talked a little bit about 20 by 2020. Can you explain how that vision kind of speaks to where we are now in the game, and is that still our goal, 20 campuses by 2020?
When we came up with 2020, and we did that as an elder team, we really wrestled with, God, what do you have for us next? Because several years ago, we believed God called us to do 5 in 5 years. And we prayed about that, fasted about that, and we saw God accomplish that. And it was, frankly, an amazing story for us. And so we once again met as an elder team and a staff, and we prayed and fasted, and we took several months to really say, God, we want to hear your voice. We don't want to miss this. Right. And so we as an elder team agreed that we sensed God was calling us to do 20 by the year 2020, to do 20 by 2020. Now, we already had 5 at the time, so that means that we need to do 15 more. So then last year we did 4 on Easter, and so now we have 11 more. So we are still committed to seeing those 11 done. Now hopefully some of those are church plants. They're not campuses. The intent was never for Park to be one church in many locations. Our hope would be we are one church in several locations with a lot of church plants. That where we saw those things launched, and then they became our daughters, but eventually became our sisters, and together we were committed to the work in the city. So this coming year in 2017, we're looking at the possibility of doing one, possibly West Rogers Park. We're not opposed to anything else. If a church comes to us and say, would you consider adopting us? We are definitely open to that conversation, since we've already done that a few times. Mm-hmm. But this year we're looking at making sure our campuses are spiritually healthy, that we're looking outward and being more outwardly focused. In our residency program, we have this residency program. We're investing in men and women to be engaged as campus pastors or care ministry or operations or small groups. We want to make sure our bench is ready, that we have teams that are ready. So we're looking, for me, I'm looking at 2017 as a chance for us to kind of regroup, because in 2018 and 2019, we hope to see a bunch more campuses get planted. And
how can people attending Park across all campuses, how can we contribute to the health of our local campus?
Man, that is a great question, and I wish more people asked that question. I think one of the things is to make sure you are personally spiritually healthy, that you are growing in your relationship with Christ, that you're engaged in community, because we're not meant to do this by ourselves, that you're making sure that you're living out these 12 marks that we find to be very important and very biblically sound for us, and living out your generosity, not just financially, but with your time. So you're serving and you're engaged, you're giving your life away, whether it's in the church or outside of the church in one of our partner ministries. But if you are pursuing those things and you are spiritually healthy, when you get then a number of those kind of people together, you'll begin to have a spiritually healthy faith community. Jill, someone once said to me years ago, I've been here 12 years now, years ago, that Chicago was known as a place where you'd go to plant a church and it would die. Now, things have begun to change over the last couple of years as young guys are coming in and willing to take that challenge on. But we want to be, that's one of the reasons we want to be in Chicago, because it is such a difficult city. It's such a hard place, and that's why we're committed to church planting. We are engaged with something called the CPCP, which is Chicago Partnership for Church Planting. It has nothing to do with us. We helped get it started, but it's a number of churches that have come together to support new church plants here in the city. And we financially support that. We have a couple of our staff folks that are on that team, as well as one of our elders, because we want to get behind new church plants in the city, because we don't want them to fail. We want them to flourish. We don't just need one church per neighborhood. We need many churches per neighborhood. And so we want to do our fair share. We want to do our 20 by 20. But at the same time, Chicago Partnership for Church Planting are committed to doing 50 church plants by 2020. And we want to be a part of that as well. And we want to see them succeed, and we want to do what's necessary to help them get up and going. Maybe you've heard me get up in front of our folks when we support one of these church plants, and I have said, this church, it might be in your neighborhood, this new church. We love this guy. If God's calling you, you should go. Because our competition is not another church. We're in this together to see the kingdom built and the gospel proclaimed here in the city of Chicago.
I think that leads to the question of how do you make sure, when we have a vision for something, that it is gospel rooted from the beginning throughout the work being done?
It's two ways. One is elders. We are constantly asking that. Elders are those leaders that God has raised up to lead our church and to care for it and protect it. So we talk about that on a regular basis. We lovingly hold each other accountable, but also we listen to folks in our seats who ask questions or make statements or make suggestions, because we're in this together. This is a team sport. And if it ever becomes how big can Park be, then we have missed what God has called us to do. The issue is people. The issue is every one of us have neighbors and people we care about on our sports teams, our co-workers, or whatever it might be, wherever we are engaged. And they all have names, and they all have stories, and we care about them. They're made in God's image. And so really, if we ever lose sight of that, then we need to get out of this.
I hear, attending Park over the past couple of years, hearing about our 1% goal. That's 27,000 people. That's a lot of people. How help us wrap our minds around that? How do we, believe with great anticipation and expect that God is at work as we chip away to get that 1%? How do we do this?
That came to us, 10 years ago. 10 years ago when we were thinking about moving into this building or thinking about buying this building, we began to say, God, what would you have us do in the city of Chicago? And as an elder team and as a leadership team, we began to pray about that. And that's when we believe God very clearly said 1%. 1%. I'm with you, 27,000. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it was something for us, Jill, that God gave us that we've said a number of times. It's so big that unless God's in it, we're doomed. And that's the kind of vision we wanted to have. God, we want to believe you for something so great that we can't figure it out on our own. We got a lot of talented, gifted people. We can figure a lot out. But when you got something that hairy, that huge, then it's obviously God's got to be in this. Now, the way you break it down, though, the way that you are able to get your mind around this is that you think about it by community. So there's 77 community neighborhoods. If you think about what does it mean to reach 1% of each of those 77 community neighborhoods? So when we think about the 9 locations we're in right now, we say, all right, what's 1% of that neighborhood you're in? What does it look like for you to reach that 1%? Now, all of a sudden, that 27,000 gets shrunk down a little bit. Now, let me take it one more step. We've been talking this fall about who's your one. Who's your one, right? Who's that one person that you love, you care about, you're already friends with, they're very important to you, where the two of you share good news with each other. And your privilege is to be able to share the good news of what Christ has done in your life. Now that 27,000 is not just broken down to a neighborhood, now it's broken down to a person. And maybe several of us might have more than one. But now all of a sudden it comes down to a place where you go, I can get my arms around that because it's this person who I already care about, who I already love, and I'm engaged with.
Give us an update on what we've been doing to support Renew and just a couple stories from this past year, or what kind of comes to mind when you think about this past year?
I tell you the fun thing, probably the first thing, is this brave initiative, this young woman named Jen, who wants to take high school students, high school women, and give them a skill on how to code. And so part of Renew is giving her some seed money to get started, this young entrepreneur. And we would love to see more of that take place.
Awesome.
And we want to engage better with our partner ministries. We have several, By the Hand Club, GRIP, several others that we love and want to be even more engaged with. We give them a lot of people. When I sit down with their leaders, they tell us that usually we're the first or second in terms of the amount of volunteers that we give. But how do we do that better? How do we engage better? But also, how do we mobilize our folks to be engaged? I'm glad people serve in the church. I'm glad people usher or do whatever they do. But it's when I engage in my neighborhood that now the issues in the neighborhood become far more important to me. So how do we mobilize our people to be more engaged in the needs of their neighborhood? And that's what Renew is leading for us. 10%
of our budget goes outside of the walls here at Park, so be that in the city, but also what does that mean for global?
Yeah. And if I can say, 10% of our budget, but that doesn't count the number of people who serve outside our doors and how they are generous to a lot of our partner ministries as well, in which we love, and we think that's a great thing. Globally, we want to see 100 global partners. That means people that have been raised up at Park, been trained and equipped at Park, that we're investing in, and they're going to all different parts of the world. Primarily, we have a real heart for the 1040 window, which is, if you think of the toughest areas of the world, the ones you hear on the news on a regular basis, that's the 1040 window. And we would love to see church planting take place. And so a lot of these 100 partners that would be raised up would be engaged in that kind of work. We also want to be involved in projects that are taking place with some of our partners overseas. They're engaged in either Bible translation or planting churches or whatever, and they don't have the resources because of the city that they're in or the country that they're in, the difficulty of that country. Then we want to be helpful to them, to be able to say, hey, let's get behind you and to see what takes place.
Can you just share some stories behind what God is doing with our global ministries?
There is a Turkish gentleman that was raised in Germany, and he is going to go back to his fatherland to plant a church. And so we've been in conversations with him. He's come here, he's preached, and we are going to be supportive of him. And we are looking really to raise up a team to go over with him. He would love a bunch of us to go over and be a part of that team. So that's the one we're very excited about right now. That's on the front burner. That'll probably happen in March. He'll be moving with his family in March.
Awesome.
And right now, you know, Turkey is a dicey place. And so this guy has a great deal of courage. And we're excited about that, and we're praying for him, and we're asking him, what can we do to help you get there? Part of our 2020 plan is to partner with one of our overseas partners to plant a church. And so this gentleman could very well easily fit into that vision.
We're at the halfway point of this 2-year journey. What happens after 2017? I'm right now going to make a commitment for this next year of where I think that God can grow my generosity, but is it over? What happens after this?
Let me answer it in two ways. On the personal level, we hope that the way that you've grown in generosity will continue. The way that you look at your stuff and the things that God's entrusted to your care begins to change, continues to change. Just like we heard the story recently of the couple who said, I'm not going to buy the bigger house, I'm going to wait because I want to invest in the kingdom. People are making decisions. People are beginning to look at their lives differently because of making generosity a priority. So we're hoping that becomes a pattern now for the rest of your life. It's not just something you're going to do for the next year or two and then go, okay, I'm going to go back to life as normal. But that you've so tasted how God has moved in your life through this generosity, that you've so recognized, I am partnering with God in the building of this kingdom, and that the stories that are being shared are going, I've invested in those stories, that you want to continue. So on a personal level. On a macro level, I would say is that we have not yet accomplished what God's called us to do for 2020. And so we're moving forward. We're saying that's the ultimate end right now. I should say the short-term end for us is that 2020. And so we want to keep moving in that direction.
What about for somebody who's watching right now saying, if I were to give, it would be so small, it would not matter, Park will go on without me, and someday, if I have more zeros after my name, I'll give. What do you say? Are we looking for a certain type of giver? What's your answer to that? Giving's
more important for you than it is for the church, believe it or not. It is all about what God's doing in you and what God's calling you to do. And if that little amount is what God's calling you to do, and that's where your indication of faithfulness and generosity and sacrifice, it comes together, where the junction of those things come together, then man, by all means, you should give that with great delight, and God loves that. God loves that. Remember the story of the widow's mite. Very, very small gift, and yet Jesus recognizes her faithfulness with that small gift. So I would first say, we have a need to give more than the church has a need for you to give. But the second thing is that it's a number of these small gifts together that when those are pulled together, we're able to fulfill the vision that God has given us. You know what I find interesting at Park? We don't have that one big sugar daddy. We don't. It is a number of faithful people who give that make the vision at Park happen. The issue is not about the amount. The issue is about the journey of discipleship for each one of us. Because, Jill, what's going to happen is you may not stay in Chicago. You may move. Maybe Denver, because it seems like half of us moved to Denver. But you may move somewhere. And what we're interested in is that you've learned the discipline and you've learned the benefits and the joy of giving generously. And you'll take that with you. Because this is about the kingdom. It isn't about Park. Because you're going to go to your new church and hopefully you're going to invest there. And they're going to benefit. That part of the kingdom's going to benefit. So it's not about this is what Park needs. It is about what I need and what I need the Spirit to do in my life and grow me. And I take that with me wherever I go. I'll tell you this, we've seen that happen a number of times where people learn about giving here, but they don't begin to practice it here. They go to their next church, and that's where they begin to practice, and they'll send me an email, and this has happened many, many times, and they'll say, I'm beginning to give at my new church, and I learned it at Park. And I say, that's fantastic, because that's what it's all about. We want to see you investing in the kingdom.
That's awesome. Awesome to hear. If it is between me and what the Spirit leads me to, why do I need to fill out the commitment card?
Yeah, we've had a number of these conversations because that's new for us at Park. We've never done that until last year. But what it allows us to do is it allows us to figure out our budget. It allows us to figure out how do we sort out the vision that God has given us in the 2-year increment that we have chosen at this point. So it's very helpful when someone fills out their card. It's very helpful for us to be able to go, okay, this is what right now we can count on to fulfill what God's called us to do.
For those of us who have committed to partnership, why is the commitment to Unfinished also important?
Again, I'll go back to we're helping you understand what God's calling you to do. Because remember, the other commitments as a partner is be engaged in a faith community, a smaller faith community, a small group, to serve. We all submit ourselves to the elders. These are all things biblically that we're called to do. So all we're doing is elevating what God calls us to do as followers of Christ. So you make a commitment to a local church. We're asking you then to be very mindful of those things that Christ calls us to do. And one of them is to participate financially. And if I may, Jill, you know what happens when someone makes a commitment here and they're invested here, and then they move, you know, they're done their schooling, or their company transfers them, or they just going to move closer to family, whatever reason. They're all great reasons. I hate to see anybody leave the city, but we bless them and they go. And here's what I say to them, because one of the questions they ask is, Jackson, I still have an unfinished commitment. What do I do? And I say to them, listen, continue to give until you find your next church. And then when you find your next church, we free you up and you invest in that next church, because they also have a vision. But until you do, why don't you keep investing here, because you know what God has called us to do here.
What should be our prayer? What should be on our hearts this week that we would ask God?
I think you ask God, what do you want to do in me? How are you going to use this to grow me? How do I learn to trust you more? That's really the issue. The issue is not our budget. The issue is, God, what do you want to do in me as a disciple, as a follower of your Son? Wrestle with that question.
What's your prayer for us as the shepherd of the flock, lead pastor? What's your prayer over these couple days? You know,
Corinthians talks about a cheerful giver, that we would learn to cheerfully be engaged in generosity. That we wouldn't be tight-fisted but open-handed. And so my prayer is that we as a church community would live with open hands and say, God, all that you've given me, I'm a steward of, and you've entrusted my care, and I want to live generously. That's my prayer.
Thinking to the end. So end of December 2017, we'll still be unfinished, right?
Yes.
But our journey on this 2-year initiative will come to a close. What do you hope would be true of Park? What could we sit down and celebrate and share with the church? What do you hope would be true of us?
I'd hope all our campuses are spiritually healthy and they're flourishing, because we're investing in all of them, because every location is important to us. But Jill, to be honest with you, nothing lights me up more, excuse the pun, than when I go in and see the candles lit and knowing that represents new life.
Yeah.
I would love to see hundreds of people, all these ones of ours that we're praying for and we're making choices around and re-engaging with them and saying no to other things to be with them, that we are seeing them become followers of Jesus and we're telling their stories. To me, if we at the end of 2017 were able to look back and go, look at all these people that God's drawn in the kingdom. You know, it's like I could die a happy man, because those are people important to us.
That is so exciting to hear, and I know personally it's amazing to just realize each one of us has an individual role in this. And so yeah, I hope that this conversation was helpful and that people can continue praying about what God would have us do.